Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Project Flux podcast. Today, you have me and James, and it's going to be slightly different this time because we're recording this ahead of schedule as James is going away on holiday. So, James, say hello. Where are you going?
Yeah, it's my turn at last. Yeah, I'm off to Rome, which I'm really excited about. So flying out later today. But we wanted to make sure we kept the show on the road, as we say. So we thought we'd do a quick podcast ahead of time. So we might miss a few big stories, although I don't think there's a huge amount that can happen. But that's famous last words between now and Monday. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, famous last words, exactly, James. I mean, for this episode, really, I'd imagine it being a lot more focused. So, in last week's kind of podcast, or even the one that we recorded this week and released this week, we
hmm
touched on Strawberry.
hmm
And Strawberry is OpenAI's secret, but potentially most powerful model.
hmm
And why Strawberry is so important today is because it supposedly marks the next generation of LLMs, and it creates this huge step change in terms of AI capability, getting us closer to AGI.
hmm
And this is a world where machines will be just as smart as humans, right? So in this podcast, I'd like to talk a bit more about how what is a next generation of AI, James, and kind of how what that next level of reasoning looks like.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're making quite a big assumption there, aren't we? That
Mm.
strawberry is going to be that next level of reasoning. And we spoke last week about we're not sure. Is it GPT-5? Is it not? Um, and only time will tell on that. But whether it is or isn't, I think is kind of irrelevant because it's only a matter of time. If that's not going to get to that level two, and when we talk about level two, that's the kind of artificial intelligence with human level reasoning. They call it PhD level reasoning. So if you imagine what percentage of the population is PhD, I would imagine it's like 0.01% or something like that. Then you're saying that you've got artificial intelligence that's going to be in that top tier of human intelligence. Where we are currently is level one, which is what a lot of people are using. The chat GPTs of this world, the Claudes, the Gemini models, they're all at level one. So that level two reasoning, I guess it's not going to be like a big necessarily event like, oh, here we are, we're at level two. I would imagine it happens quite organically over a period of months. Like what will undoubtedly happen is somebody will release a model. It might not even be OpenAI. It might be one of the others because we'll talk about the fact that Elon Musk has just released Grok 2. And there'll be a realization that this is next level, right? So this is next level reasoning. But these things sort of come out in waves. Not everyone gets them at the same time. So then there'll be the race. Then the competitors will have models to match it. And then it will, over a period of months, I would imagine, you'll realize that we're at this next level of reasoning and people will start to be able to use it for different reasons. So I don't foresee like this big kind of news story. We are now at level two. It will probably transpire over a period of time, is my guess.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting thing because there's certain predictions saying when we're going to hit AGI. I think it was Ray Kurzweil saying within the next 5 years.
Well, he said
Elon
in his book, but don't forget that was published about 10 years ago. I think he talks about 2035, but I think the
2030.
latest one that he's about to publish. So Ray Kurzweil was the guy who wrote The Singularity is Near. He's about to publish the follow-up, The Singularity is Nearer. I believe he's bringing that timeline forward. I'm not sure what to.
Yeah, exactly. And we're also getting even earlier within the next couple of years with Elon Musk and a few others. So even though it feels like we might not feel the change as overtly as we might, we can definitely feel it bubbling, and there'll be all of this new level of capability where we just start to use AI for more advanced things and we don't even realize that we're using it for more advanced things, right? It'll just become default in terms of how we live our everyday lives. But the reason why I kind of mentioned Strawberry is because when I try and imagine the next generation of AI, it's quite difficult to think about what next level reasoning is, and what this next generation is. So looking at the Strawberry model and aligning that to the roadmap, which you kind of touched on, James, in terms of saying level two within OpenAI's kind of direction, I've just kind of picked up a few things in terms of what that might look like. So one thing that they mentioned is the ability for AI to kind of tackle complex tasks over extended periods.
Mm,
So right now, when you're using ChatGPT in some of these tasks, it has a really small context window. You ask it a question, it'll give you a response.
mm,
Now, what this next generation of AI might look like is we're talking more multi-step reasoning and long-term strategizing, right? Which these are both hallmarks of human intelligence, right? It's kind of why we go to work and what we do. We strategize continuously,
Mhm.
and we try to, advance the insight that we can get to do better effectively. So let's say you're working on a project, and rather than focusing on getting insight on a single task, imagine having an AI which can grasp the whole project end to end, providing insight and reasoning as you move through the project. Also, maybe having the ability to think about how the project itself impacts the wider program and the portfolio, or the business. So this will
Yeah.
give AI, the ability to tackle more complex phenomena, elevating its capability. And that's currently where we aren't at, but where we might go. So what are your thoughts on that, James?
Well, a lot of people talk about the current set of models as uh, something that augments our service, but you always got to have the human in the loop, and I believe that at the moment, human plus algorithm, it works really, really well, and we can't necessarily trust the outputs of the LLMs and what have you. We've still got to have a human in the loop. Um, and some people say, well, you can treat the AI as another member of the team
Mm.
and refer to it for information and knowledge, but you still got a human overriding that. I think what the next generation will do, bearing in mind this kind of PhD level reasoning, it's very possible that in most cases, the AI will then become the smartest person in the team. So rather than it augmenting what we do, it starts leading what we do. And that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be a massive shift, because at the moment, I think people are saying, oh, responsible, safe use of AI. Absolutely, we've got to. But at what point does it become safer to trust the AI than to trust humans?
Mm.
So
And
that's going to be like, from a cultural point of view as well, there's going to be a big reluctance to let go. And there's going to be a big reluctance to acknowledge that actually, even though it's a member of the team, the AI model may well be your most reasonable and best educated opinion.
and how do you feel about that as a professional?
It's a really good question. I guess until we're in the situation, I don't know, because at the moment we still got the override button. We can still say, okay, well, I've used ChatGPT or an AI for that, but I'm going to override it, and I'm going to use my good old gut feel and good old gut experience. The point where I have to acknowledge that my gut feel isn't as good as the AI or the experience means that, not from a technical point of view, but from a personal point of view, I'm going to have to acknowledge that I'm, even though I've had years of experience, I'm second fiddle to the AI. I think that there's still a way for the two to join up quite well, because there's still going to be things that humans can do that the AI can't, and that's all things around emotional intelligence and all things
Mm.
around the people part of it. I think, having those
And we'll come on to that. We'll come
conversations.
on to that, James. We'll come on to
Yeah,
that bit there. I've got a good question for you there then. But just
yeah.
kind of what you mentioned there is you're talking from a position whereby you are quite senior. You say yourself, you're involved with the task force, you're the chair of the task force,
Mm.
the RSCS, etc., etc. Do you think that perception of letting AI take the wheel? Do you think it will be different for those who were early on in their career and those who were later on in their career?
Definitely. I think people coming in, like as AI natives, if you like, they're using it at school, it will just be second nature. So they won't feel insulted or, feel like their ego is being threatened, because they'll understand that, right, the AI is good at these things and I'm good at these things. So I let the AI do the things that they're good at, and I'll do the things that I'm good at. And that might be more and more creative stuff, because I still think that one of the things that human intelligence has that's going to take a long time for the AI to really get to grips with is the creativity, because the very basis of AI is it's trained on past material. So it's only ever
Mm-hmm.
going to be as good as what it's trained on. Whereas what human beings are exceptionally good at is coming up with things out of thin air, tapping
Yeah.
into that universal consciousness and that kind of, you know, where does that come from? When you sit there and you have that eureka moment and you come up with an idea, where does that come from? I don't
Right.
know
So let's
quite.
Yeah, and let's stick with that. So, advanced reasoning, is one of the components which will symbolize this advanced reasoning capability by AI, right? And the way that I look at that is kind of advanced abstract reasoning. So it's the ability for the AI to make an accurate and reliable inference without much context. So like you said, humans have a gut feel. They have this thing which is kind of intangible that helps us to make an inference without much context. And that can often be right and correct. Okay, so
But
if
often
AI
wrong,
can,
though.
and it can all think, and it can also be wrong, right? So if we can get to a
More than you
position,
think.
yeah, more than you think. And again, it's relative, it's subjective, but this is where if we can get AI to achieve that, and if that is something which might be seen within Strawberry or kind of these newer tools, that might be something which we might see as being groundbreaking. Now, if you look further into that, that would mean then that AI will then have the ability to do this independent hypothesis testing, which we know is the approach that we had to scientific discovery, right? And this is why this sort of stuff is so important to us, because if we can do this end to end, thinking through process and these internal dialogues, or kind of what you mentioned about multi-step thinking, that's where we start to see an upgrade in capability. But just going back to what you mentioned, James, how does AI typically learn? It gets fed information, right? And it's trained on historical information or data, right? And then there's some calculation in between, and it gives you an output based on what it's learned.
Well,
Now,
for now, level 1, 2, and 3, but we all know level 4, if anyone looks at the roadmap, talks about AI, that does get to that kind of being able to come up with creative ideas out of nowhere. That's when I
exactly.
think all bets are
And,
off.
yeah, and I would argue that we're starting to see this now. And I think that manifests more in terms of how we're training some of these AI models. So Strawberry itself, the reason why there's a lot of hype around it is because it is a form of self-trained AI. Right. So this means it's not supervised by humans, and it can train itself through pattern analysis, right, and draw its own conclusion using data that is not guided by humans. Okay. So think how useful this will be when AI can solve problems that humans ourselves struggle to define. So we're putting information into an AI, right, to solve issues which we can define as humans. If the AI is self-training itself, okay, that would mean that it can think and draw conclusions to problems that we haven't been able to define.
Well, that's
So I
the
mean,
great promise, isn't it? That's the great promise with AI. I mean, you hear about people rightly very concerned about the damage that the data centers and the compute power is having on the environment and the sustainability agenda. But the kind of argument to that is when it gets good enough, it's going to be able to come up with solutions to these problems.
yeah.
So, that's where we need it to go, frankly, because otherwise it's unsustainable.
But so there's a question for you then, because this symbolizes to me a shift to a level of AI agency, right, or independence. So
Definitely.
what are your thoughts on that? And AI being independent, kind of not needing humans, it kind of some might take.
Yeah, so we get into matrix territory, don't we, and Terminator territory where we've got AIs running around making its own decisions. That is not really a tech question. That's a philosophical question, and we can get very, very deep on that, Yoshi, and speak a lot about it. And I think governments and institutions need to tackle that question because it's coming round faster than they think. And I've said it quite a few times. It doesn't matter. Like we can argue till the cows come home whether we're going to reach that point in 3 years' time or 20 years' time. It doesn't matter, does it? It's going to be within that time scale, and that's still soon. Even if you take the worst case, like 20 years, that's still soon. That's still, we'll still be on this planet. Our children will still be on this planet. So it's something we've got to get our heads around. And what I worry about is people just kick the can down the road and not sort of get to the bottom of it sooner rather than later, because there's got to be a halfway house. I don't think we ever want to get to the point where we just hand off the entire decision-making process to
Yeah.
AI. Because can you imagine in warfare, or can you
Mhm.
imagine in, just letting AI make decisions based on what's best for the planet? Because we've heard the analogy before that if you say to an AI, well, your number one objective is the good of the planet, that it might make a decision that the best thing for the planet is to get rid of humanity.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. And
you've got to be so careful. So I think that there needs to be a halfway house where we allow AI to make decisions up to a certain point, but there has to be some thresholds over which point humans have to be in the loop, and that is things around warfare, things around human rights, things around health and
Yeah, things which
medical
require a lot more
issues.
governance
Yeah,
for sure. But
but I don't know
and
where that line is. That we need to get to the bottom of that as a species.
yeah, and you know me, I quite like the philosophical,
Mm,
conversations in and around AI. I mean, when I think of self-training AI and I can look at some of the benefits, the things that I turn my attention to, are things like
mm,
self-driving cars or,
mm,
Tesla's robo taxis and all these different things, because the ability to self-train and learn by these quick feedback loops without having to have, that the time-consuming behavior of humans having to prep data, when me and you developing some of our GPTs on our end,
mm,
having to process data, prep
mm,
it, label it, the ability
mm,
for AI is to learn continuously, and because it can think its own, draw its own conclusion, and I guess, like you mentioned, answer questions which humans are struggling to define, it can think of these things really quickly, which makes itself very safer, or much more safer, in the context of things like self-driving cars. But kind of touching on what you mentioned, James,
mm.
if AI can then train without humans, and it can answer questions which we struggle to define, so it's got its own method of questioning to some extent. For me, there'll be some level of divergent thinking from humans and AI. And I think that is something which can be quite scary, especially because, when we start to plan AI in terms of our governments and, in private and public sector, we have a strategy and a mind map and a roadmap, right? So we're building infrastructure, we're finding new ways to develop AI, but we might need to change all of that if the AI is telling us to think differently. So this whole paradigm shift in our way of thinking is something which is going to be uh, really, really interesting.
Yeah, and quicker and isn't always better, right? So we've seen in other industries where there's been a pushback against technology, and we still hanker for traditional ways of doing things. So if you take the music industry, we've moved to streaming, but we've had this massive resurgence in vinyl. I mean, the number of people who still insist on reading books. I'm one of those because I want that. I see it as a break from technology. Um, and there's still a lot of people who like to do things in a traditional way. So what I can definitely foresee happening is this, and I think I've talked about it before, is a kind of movement against AI, where people start. We're in the middle of an AI hype at the moment, but when that kind of dies down, there might be a marketing spin that some companies use, and particularly consultancies, and you could see it in the project delivery space, where some companies brand themselves as
Mm.
without AI. We don't use AI. We are human.
Mm.
We know that. For instance, vinyl is not as good. It breaks. It's clunky. There's a lot of debate about sound quality, but it definitely picks up static and buzz and all those other things. Yet people still prefer that to very, very high quality stream music because they
It's the
want something
authenticity
tangible.
of it.
So
And
I think we're going to see a pushback at some point. Don't know when,
I,
but there
I
will
quite like what you mentioned that, talking about consultancies, because, as AI, its overall general capability improves, right, it will be able to answer not just these kind of narrow focused questions, but things which are much more broader in a sense. So
be.
it will be able to understand complex concepts and phenomena that we as humans, mental models and theories
Mm,
that we have of the world, it'll be able to deliver against that. So when we look at consultants, especially management consultants, when they're giving you information about how to run your businesses and strategize, there will be this level of threat because AI can do it for you. I guess for them,
mm.
there'll be a transition towards how companies can leverage AI as opposed to telling these companies what to do
Well,
themselves, because their
the other
model will
thing,
change.
if everyone's got access to that, then how do you differentiate yourself? So,
Mm.
if we've got AI at that level, and every company in the world is able to use that kind of strategy, so everyone's equal now. There is no way of separating people. So the separation might be actually we need the human input here.
Mm. Yeah, so
So
it
it
becomes
goes full circle.
it goes full circle. So
Mm,
yeah, so that looks at the next generation of AI and what we can expect in the future. And like I said, it's not going to be too far in the future that we start to see some of these things. But I think thinking this through kind of gives us more of an idea. It brings clarity to what we can expect in the next couple of years. So yesterday I had a thought of a question. It wasn't really tied to AI, but thinking again today, it can be kind of loosely tied back to AI. And I thought it was a question I'd ask you, James, and you're someone who
go
thinks is
for it.
quite introspective. And the question is do you think you spend more time thinking about your past or more time thinking about yourself in the future?
Wow. Okay. I'd love to see how you're going to link this into AI and project delivery, but still, well, we all live in the past or the future most of the time, right? Because very, very, very few of us live in the present. We're either looking back or we're planning forward. I would imagine probably an equal amount of time. One thing I do try and do myself is try and ground myself in the present as much as possible by techniques like meditation and things
Mm.
like that, because you've got to understand that both the past and the future don't exist. The past is just a memory, and the future, hasn't happened. So you're just sort of playing out stories in your mind. And I think it's a real, issue. It's what causes the most stress, right? If you're playing back over past things that you can't change, or
Yeah.
worrying about things in the future that haven't happened yet, that you're probably catastrophizing and it's never actually going to happen. So I think I'm like you, Yoshi. I love planning. I love
Mm.
probably a bit too much. So I'd probably say I was probably spend too much time in the future. But I also do spend like I'm sure the rest of the people listening way too much time thinking about that stupid thing I said yesterday.
Yeah, yeah.
And probably I'll think about some of the stupid things I said in this podcast after this one. But yeah, equally. But I think the important thing isn't it doesn't really matter whether it's past or future. It's about learning to live in the present.
Yeah, and I kind of have a similar approach to you, to be more present. And I'll show you how I kind of tie this back into to AI developments, right? So humans, we're looking at the past versus future thought, within humans. So we often reflect on the past to learn from experiences, right? Or we imagine the future to kind of set goals and prepare for uncertainty. So this balance itself between past reflection and future planning is crucial, for personal growth, decision making, and survival. So it kind of highlights our kind of temporal orientation, right? Whether we're more anchored in what's happened or what might happen.
Mm.
Similarly with AI systems, right? They operate with both past data and future predictions.
Yeah.
So traditional AI models are heavily past orientated at the moment,
Mm.
and they rely on historical data to inform decisions. They analyze patterns from previous information to make sense of the present, like we were saying, this abstract level of reasoning. It's all formulated on past data. Now, the reason why I found this important, because this next generation of AI, like we mentioned with Strawberry and its self-training methods, they are increasingly future focused. So they're designed to anticipate and strategize over extended periods, making decisions that are not just reactive, but proactive. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
but
So now it's
still
taken.
based on past data, though. I mean, a lot of it's still using past data to.
Yeah. I guess it's past data, but it learns quickly. So that, in terms of where it's pulling the information from, it'll be learning almost instantly. So when you've got all these different sensors that it has, it's the ability to make decisions from that really, really quickly. So I think there's definitely parallels with the human cognition, and where that balanced focus lies. And then I was kind of thinking a bit more about that, in terms of myself and how I think. And AI thinks back and it uses information to plan ahead. We do the same, except we don't just look back to make decisions about the future as humans, right? So we also look back because of different things like nostalgia. And I think this is something that AI doesn't have, and where I think that's important for planning is that this opens us up for more biased thoughts. So we look back, we live in nostalgia, it kind of influences our memories and it changes the way that we think forward, which means that can be a flaw, right? So it can be a bad thing. And that shows us why. I was asking you earlier about would you let AI take the seat in terms of our planning?
Yeah, but
So,
humans are really bad because it's not just past data that we use. It's gut feel, and then it's groupthink. It's people not wanting to raise their head above parapet. There's loads of human conditions that make really bad decisions. I think the worst one is, I know we touched on this last week. The worst one is this assumption that our gut feel is somehow really, really good, and that if you've got loads of experience, somehow that counts above any kind of um, statistical analysis.
yeah,
And
and
we're
I think
really, really bad at that as a species.
Yeah, and this is why, when I asked you that question, if you were to ask me the question back, I'd probably say, for certain things, there would be a point where, I'd let the AI take the seat because it hasn't got that level of subjective thinking. It isn't as emotionally biased as we are. But what I would say is that that very weakness of having emotion is also our strength, right? And
It
again,
is
you
our
tied
strength,
to it.
yeah.
So
Because
because
sometimes you need to override a decision because of that. But sometimes, despite all that, let's take it on a project context, right?
mm,
Sometimes, despite all the, let's say something's happened. There's been an event on the project, right?
mm,
Outside where there's been some event that's happened. Let's say someone's been run over or something.
mm,
So you could use all the data in the world, and the data will look at the objective and say there's no reason to shut the site down, right?
mm,
Because we still got to keep to our objectives. But how do you quantify that human element, which is it's just the wrong thing to do? We need to shut the site down because it's going to look really bad, or we got to think about people's feelings.
yeah.
That's the bit that I can't. I think it's going to be quite a while before AI is better than humans at that.
Yes, and this is why in this episode today we're looking at the next generation of AI, and it got me thinking. If AI can do all of this stuff, and it has this advanced reason, which ours is tainted with kind of more subjective thoughts and emotion, right? This is where I feel humans have that advantage, right? Even though it can be our weakness, emotional intelligence is so powerful, and it's something where if we can position ourselves in, it's what makes us human. It's the very essence of life. So I think within our daily lives, but also within a workplace environment, emotional intelligence is going to be key because people say that the personality is often driven by how you feel, how you think, and how you act, and more importantly, how you feel within humans within this context is drives how we think and how we act. Now, if you think to how an AI then thinks in terms of an AI personality, AI thinks and acts in absence of its feeling. So when I ask you the question a bit more about, do you think that AI will be divergent in its thinking because it doesn't need humans? I think that's why I think there'll be a level of divergence is because it doesn't think through that level of empathy. It hasn't got that feeling to drive its thoughts. So in terms of where we place ourselves as humans, I think if we kind of build our emotional intelligence and just be human, I don't think we need to worry about our position in the world, in our daily lives, but also at work. I
Yeah,
think we
don't
still
forget.
have
I
that
mean,
that
so
advantage.
there's a lot of humans who haven't got very much emotional intelligence. So it depends who. It might be that we can train what it means to ask the right questions in terms of emotional intelligence and those human factors, and then the AI would end up being better than some humans. There's a lot, and it's one of the big problems in the workplace, actually, that not enough people have got that emotional intelligence. And how do you train a human to have that skill? It's really, really hard because if you fake it, it becomes quite obvious. So, sort of countering what I've just said, going full circle, it might be that we get to the point where an AI can, especially when we start talk about voice, because the voice is so important with human intelligence, and we're moving to this voice input and this voice, where you've got an AI that really does. I know you wanted to touch on the friend thing. I think you're going to talk about it in the newsletter, but you've got something that talks to you in a way that has been trained to have emotional intelligence. I think I might have changed my mind. I think
See,
maybe actually, maybe the AI can help overcome the lack of emotional intelligence with a lot of human beings.
with a lot of human beings, yeah, and this is also interesting because we saw the other day. I found out a new job role which is up and coming, and it's an AI personality designer.
Mm.
And then similarly to that, we went to a talk recently with Martin Paver and Donnie McNichol, and Donnie kind of looks at human-centric data and how that plays its part within managing projects. In the session, I then asked Donnie and said, Donnie, we looked at the Figure 2 robot the other day, and it's been deployed out in a production environment at BMW, and there's a high likeliness that might be on sites in the next few years. How do you then think the dynamic of human data will be important
Yeah.
within the site? So I think this idea of human intelligence, trying to mimic that's going to be really important going forward. But yeah,
Massive questions, Yoshi, and no full answers, but it's going to be, as always, interesting to see how it plays out over the course of the next 2 months.
excellent. Well, yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there. I think that was quite a deep, profound conversation. When you let us loose, not
Yeah.
have to go through some of these news articles, James, you're not going on a massive tangent. But good conversation. And yeah, anything to wrap up?
No, I think it was good, doing something slightly different because we are recording this ahead of time. So we haven't gone through the big stories, but obviously the big stories will be available in the newsletter, which we will put into the show notes, and then we'll kind of be back to normal next week. So next week, we're going to have Anthony Slumbers on,
Mm-hmm.
which will be really looking forward to that conversation with him. And then, believe it or not, we're getting back towards the new school term in September and heading towards the end of the year. So it's been really, really interesting. And just to thank all the listeners, really, because we're going to be hitting a big milestone over the course of the next week or so in terms of the number of people who listen to and subscribe to this podcast, which is beyond our wildest imagination. When we started this, it was just a chance for me and Yoshi just to record our chats, really. And we set ourselves some very kind of what we thought were ambitious goals in terms of numbers listening, but we've absolutely smashed that. So big milestone coming up for us all. We'll have a little celebration. And just to thank you all. But please share the podcast, please share the newsletter, because that's why we do it. We do it just to sort of help. We just want to be givers and share all the knowledge and the information that we find with people in the project delivery profession. So that's it. See you all next week. Anything else from you, Yosh?
No, that's it, mate. Perfect close up. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you again next week.
Bye, everyone.
So extreme, a project flux is here.